and it needed to be black, so I repainted the entire thing and detailed the interior. From that, I got a couple responses and needed to do it again for a white one, and now again I got asked by someone to do his Seat Leon, and that one started off gold and needed to be white. So I firstly started removing all of the paint with Zero Paint's paint stripper. This is for metal only, as it will attack the plastic. Since this one is a metal body, it can easily be used for that. Once all of the paint had been removed, I moved on to scribing out all the banner lines. They were already pretty nice and deep, but I just wanted to be sure, so I went over them a couple times with my panel line scriber. Once that was all finished, I could move on to scuffing up the entire body, just using some 400 grit sanding sponges, making everything nice and even, and also give it a bit of bite for the primer to stick to it. Normally I would use my trusty old microfiller gray primer, but that is for plastic. Since this body isn't plastic, I of course didn't really want to use a plastic specific primer, as that most definitely will not stick to this metal. So instead I took out some 1K etch primer. This is pretty much the same deal as with the plastic primer, only this is of course intended for metal. I firstly went over all the hard to reach, easy to forget spots, and then also coated the entire inside of the body before moving on to the rest of the body with a first light coat. The first coat went on just fine, so I set it aside for about 10 minutes to cure and applied a second coat just to be sure that everything was nice and evenly covered. With the second and final coat of primer on, I set it aside for about 60 minutes to cure before moving on to applying a couple coats of white. The white is covering quite nicely over the light gray primer, so a second coat was applied, and that was pretty much all that needed to be done color-wise. The second and final coat of white has been applied, so I let the body cure for another hour, cleaned out the airbrush, mixed up the 2K clear, and started applying that. The first coat went on nice and smooth, but just to be sure, as always, a second coat was applied to make it even smoother. With the second coat now applied, I checked the body to see if everything was nice and even. In this case it was, so I let it sit and cure for about 2 to 3 days before moving on to the next stages in the build. After 2 to 3 days, the clear coat is nice and hard and safe to be handled with your hands. Now it's not fully cured yet, but good enough in this case to move on to the next stage, and that is to add a lot of the black details for the trim and some of the bumper pieces as well. On the rear bumper there are a couple of small reflectors. These needed to be painted clear red. Now there were some pieces on the model itself, but during the disassembly they couldn't be taken out as they were glued in so strong that they broke. Now this clear coat will be sufficient and look pretty much the same as the original pieces did, so in that case it's good enough. Before gluing everything together, I needed to detail the headlight lenses with a black trim around it, and then could just start the assembly process. All of the parts and pieces for the inside are now in place, so the interior tub could be placed as well, the chassis on top, and then one screw to secure it all. A couple final pieces still need to be glued onto the body, like the side mirrors and also the antenna. After that was all said and done, it's pretty much a home stretch. The only thing that I still needed to do was paint the wheels in some silver, put the tires on, and assemble it all together back onto its display base and send it over to the customer. And there you have it, another one finished. It's a quick little project that takes a couple of days to turn around. The customer is really happy and I really enjoy these small builds. It doesn't take weeks and weeks to finish from start to finish. Doesn't really